Yay! Okay, we're recording. So we're back talking about dialogue. Um,
Woohoo!
yay! Do you want to give the audience an update on your life?
Yeah, I guess my life has changed a little bit since the last time we talked.
It
Um,
has. Well, I don't know how actually. I'm saying that like something big happened, but
well, it did. I mean, the semester started. I enrolled and was accepted into a grad program at Towson University, so that's pretty
yeah,
exciting. Um, yeah, so I'm actually taking 3 classes this semester, which is a little bit scary and a little bit overwhelming. I was only planning to take 2, and then when they went everything virtual, I was like, well, it seems silly not to take another class since I
yeah.
don't have
Just
the
pile it
commute.
on.
But now, and
Pile it
if we
on.
didn't have a proposal due on Tuesday for our day job, um, it wouldn't feel quite so overwhelming.
Sweet
So,
funny. Yeah.
but yeah.
Wait, you got to say what degree you're getting because it's really cool.
Well, it's a master's in experimental psychology.
Yeah, love it.
So the goal is for my education to match my experience. So the program is fantastic. The instructors are great. I guess they're called professors, not instructors in a college setting. Um, they're all really great, super knowledgeable, really excited about their field. But it's interesting because they say things like the goal of this program is to get you at least one, but more like 2 or 3 publications before you graduate, so that you can, you know, pad your resume, not pad your resume, but like have them on your resume to help you get a job. And I'm like, I have a job that I really like.
Yeah,
I have a couple
that you're really good at.
publications already.
Yeah.
So it's just really funny to see the difference, like in where I am in my life trajectory compared to some of the other people in the program who are like just getting started in their careers or haven't started a career at all.
All still wide-eyed and innocent.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
That's
It's
awesome. Well, I like to think that the reason I wanted you to mention what your degree was because I like to pretend that when you say you're doing experimental psychology, that it means that you actually get to like run experiments on people.
and
So that like every day for your degree, you like tie people to chairs and do weird experiments on them.
well, we do weird experiments, but the institutional review boards don't like it when you actually tie people to chairs. So
Yeah, we just don't
I
tell them.
don't, I don't know. I have to like take an ethics course
Ethics,
online and get a certificate.
as
So,
long as they don't listen to this, we're good.
I mean,
Yeah,
how many people are actually listening to it?
I
3?
don't know. I refuse to check the stats. I have no idea. This is my way of coping with anxiety. Is I just
You throw
claim
your head in the
ignorance.
sand.
It's all right. Just put my hand in the sand and pretend not to know.
I mean, I
Uh,
feel like that's a very reasonable response to
well,
stress.
if a lot of people are listening to this, that's going to stress me out because I'm going to be like, I don't know what I'm doing. And if just a few people are listening to this, that's going to stress me out because I'm going to be like, how do I get more? So it's just better. Like I set a
Uh-huh.
numerical goal. I'm gonna produce 50 and then evaluate. So
Okay,
yeah. So I got my numerical goal. Moving forward.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's all I need. So I'll check in a year.
Okay. And I get to be on every fourth one. Okay.
Yes, every
All right.
fourth one. Sorry, I
So
had to do the math in my
that's
head.
all. That's all right.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, as long as you keep showing up every fourth one.
I mean, I'd show up every week if you just let me, if you just turn on a camera and let me talk. I mean, you don't even have to turn on the camera. I'll show up once a week anyway.
The show was so good. There might be a revolution. People may kick me off if I bring you on here every week. So, like, no more Jeff, just Laura. Uh,
I'm
yeah,
not sure that that would happen. Because again, I'm not even sure why I'm here.
whatever. Yeah, so my big news is that today is my birthday,
I was going to
which
say
I'm
that.
super excited about.
Happy
I'm
birthday.
43 on the day that we're recording this, which is not the day that it will go live, but it's the day that we're recording it. I'm 43 years old. So, sorry, I keep getting distracted by the lights behind me because this is life in the time of COVID, and my kids are playing PlayStation literally
And
like
it's reflecting.
10 feet that way, and so I keep getting a flash of light every once in a while. I'm like, what's that? Yeah. Anyway, so that's my big news, and you'd be proud of me today. I had someone call me for a ghostwriting gig, and I was an adult, and was like, I have too many projects happening right now. I cannot take on another one. Thank you for
Good for
asking. Yeah.
you.
So I was my tendency is to super overcommit to things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was
As
proud of
many
myself.
overachievers do.
Yeah. I only had to wait until I was 43 before I finally learned how to say no. I finally learned how to say no to things.
So you think if they
Yeah.
had called yesterday, you would have said yes?
Well, it's possible. Yeah. It's very possible. It's possible that if they called tomorrow, I'd say yes. But tonight, I was an adult. It's
Well,
like,
I mean,
no, I can't.
like you told us this morning, it's your birthday. You can kind of get away with anything you want.
So I can do whatever I want today. Today is my day. Um, yeah, I think so. I think that covers updates. I don't think we have anything else to talk about, do we?
No, I
No.
think your birthday and my 3 classes is pretty
Yeah,
much
that's
pretty
pretty
much
much it.
sums everything up.
Yeah, it was hard turning down the ghostwriting gig too because the guy was really nice. So
Oh,
yeah, I was almost like, I just want to work with you because you're really nice, but I can't.
did you link him
I
to your
just started
buddy?
a business. I'm have to finish the 4th book in my series. I already have committed to a ghostwriting project. I can't take on one more thing, and I work a full-time job, so I can't do. I can't take on another thing. But yeah,
Well, plus now you're homeschooling your kids because of
and then
COVID.
and I'm about to start homeschooling my kids, which is terrible. I'm not actually. I'm. They will be doing virtual learning on the desks that I built behind me. Uh, yeah, that
Oh,
is
and that's
awesome.
a big update. You've been doing some carpentry work.
That is. I've been building desks because we went to order them online and we were like, what are those prices?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I sneakily convinced my wife that I could put together a professional looking desk, and she liked the first one. Okay, so then we have now we have 3, one for me and one for the kindergartner and one for the 5th grader who are going to be working behind me. Um, but yeah, so that'll be an interesting adjustment. We'll see how that goes. Um, little scared of that. So I don't want to talk about it anymore.
You'll do great.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be fine.
Or you can just ignore it.
It's gonna be fine. The whole room's on fire behind me. It's fine. Everything's fine. Uh, everything's good. No, they're great kids. It's gonna be really good. I don't. What could go wrong? Yeah. So
Wonder.
that's our update. All right. Let's talk about dialogue. Enough about
Let's do it.
our sins. Let's talk
Let's
about dialogues.
dialogue about
So
dialogue.
today,
Are you purposely ignoring that?
what'd you say?
I said let's dialogue about dialogue.
Oh no, I just missed it. That's
Oh.
fantastic. Yeah, you have to say that every time we meet from now on. Let's dialogue about dialogue.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm all for it. You know I
yeah,
love a good pun.
that's right. So today we're see your pun was so great it made me forget the question. Um, today the question is, how do you write excellent contrasting characters? So unique characters are one thing, but then you have to have like a full cast of characters. Um, and how do you write that full cast of characters that contrast from one another and at the same time complement each other? Super hard. So let's start with, before we get into like the how to, can you think of a good cast of characters in a book
I mean,
that
all of
contrast and you
them.
love?
All of them.
Well, that's not all books have great characters. That's not true.
No, no. Okay, so all the books I read past page 7.
Okay,
Um,
that's
so
fair.
um, yeah, like so when you told me we were doing this, I went back and I like pulled a couple of books that I think are just phenomenal. Um, and the two that there are like 4 that kind of really stand out. So I have, but one is like a series. It's written by a woman named Karen Slaughter, who
Great
ironically
name.
writes horror fiction.
Yeah.
Not horror, I'm sorry, like thriller suspense.
Okay.
The
That's got to be a pen name. That's perfect.
it's actually not.
No way.
No, because and like every Q&A with her, somebody asks her
Oh
that,
yeah.
and and she's always like, no, like
Oh
I never like it just like she never made the connection, but who knows, like
yeah,
who
yeah.
knows? But she writes a series, and she did this really amazing thing. She had 2 different series and she merged them together after like, I don't know, book 8 or something.
Nice.
And the inscription on the book that merged the 2 series together I guess the dedication was, she dedicated it, she said, to my fans for trusting me. And it
Oh,
was fabulous.
that's awesome.
So the main character is, her name is Sarah Littman, and she is she lives in a small town in Georgia, and she is a pediatrician and the county's medical examiner. She's married to the chief of police, and she helps him solve crime. And then her other series of books, they've been out for long enough that I'm going to go ahead and spoil it for all three of our listeners. Uh, the
Maybe.
other,
We don't know. I'm not looking at the stats. I've got no idea.
that's true. When they come up, I'm going to start hashtagging Karen Slaughter and some of the other authors I keep referencing, and
Nice.
hopefully we will get more listeners.
Awesome.
So the other series is about an FBI, a Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent. His name is Will Trent, and he's super smart, but he suffers from dyslexia, and he grew up in a series of foster homes and orphanages, and so he's like overcome a lot. And he's got this great partner and this boss who's a badass, and just all of the characters together. And they end up merging the two series when Sarah moves back to Atlanta, and they end up working a case together. And the cast of characters is just so amazing because each person, first of all, is a fully formed character. They're
That's
not
nice.
just like characters. It would be really easy to write a medical examiner who just like sits in their office all day, like being creepy, like almost every medical examiner in every other. I mean, Rizzoli and Isles did a really good job of not making a creepy medical
Yeah,
examiner.
usually the Emmy though is kind of a weird, like
Right?
I play with dead bodies
Right?
character.
There
Yeah.
was that whole series, I guess back in the early 2000s, called Crossing Jordan, and they
Yeah.
all worked in the medical examiner's office, and they were all a
They're
little
all weird.
weird.
Yeah.
Fantastic show, but all a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
bit weird. But like, she's like a real person. And but the great thing about them is they're each bringing their own personality to the table, and every interaction, you like can predict what's going to happen because you know the character so well. And she's got like 15 books, so by book 15, if you don't kind of know the dynamics between the characters, either you're not doing your job as a
That's really
reader.
funny.
So like, that one's a really great example. And then of course, like if you want to go back to classics, To Kill a Mockingbird's cast of characters is just
Yeah.
Harper Lee. Just every single one of her characters is so unique, and yet knows who they are, and there's just so much consistency. And then from a more recent genre, it's actually a young adult book. It's called Symptoms of Being Human, and it's
I haven't
by,
read it. I've heard about it.
oh my gosh, it's so amazing. I've talked about it a lot. It's by an author named Jeff Garvin. Yeah,
Mm.
Garvin. I wrote it down so I wouldn't get it wrong.
Nice. Way to
Um,
go. Man, look at you coming prepared.
hey, if you're gonna
You're
invite me to talk
prepping.
about stuff, I'm gonna be ready. So like, I'm a huge fan of that book. That book is very different. It's about a young adult who is gender fluid and is like experiencing life, and you're seeing the story through their eyes. The character's name is Riley, and it's their experience just trying to navigate the world as a gender minority. And there's this fantastic scene about 2/3 of the way through the book, and they're coming out to their parents as gender fluid, and there's so much tension in the scene, and you can tell that the parents like want to say and do the right thing, but they really don't know. And the father, who happens to be a congressman, is like stoic and silent through most of the scene, and the mother is like trying really hard but saying all the wrong things and misunderstanding and conflating identity and sexuality, and just like, and it's just like, you're watching this dialogue unfold. And I actually went back and reread the scene because I remembered the scene, but I couldn't remember the dialogue, but I remembered the feeling that the dialogue gave me.
Yeah.
And for me, like that's what makes a great scene. And
Yeah.
that's when you know your characters are really, because what you had asked was how do you write characters that are individual
Hmm.
but complement each other? And
Yeah.
for me, like when there's that emotional impact, there's kind of awesomeness. And then my fourth one, and I'll be really quick on this one,
Yeah, I'd be
is
quick.
Lemony Snicket's uh,
Series of
Series
unfortunate
of
events.
Unfortunate Events.
So good.
That
So
cast
such
of
great
characters
books.
like
Yeah.
could not get any better.
Oh man, they're great.
Uh, yeah, so like
Uncle
those are my
Olaf, is
top
that,
four.
am I getting that name right? What's
I'm
the
sorry,
uncle's name? Olaf? Is that his
Olaf.
name?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
Count
good.
Count Olaf.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So like those are my top four as far as like the creation of a cast of characters who, and Symptoms of Being Human has a lot more characters than just the mother and the
Yeah,
father
yeah.
and Riley. But like the dynamics between them are so consistent. And then of course To Kill a Mockingbird, like every person who enters into that story is like impacts the whole trajectory from I think her name's Miss Maud, who lives across the street,
Yeah.
to Atticus and Calpurnia, and just like everybody, not just the main characters, which is actually really hard to do well, is to make your supporting characters as important dialogue wise as your main characters.
Yeah, but when you pull it off, it's so great. Like, I think my favorite books are the books where like the side characters are primary. Like I just finished reading this book, A Man Called Uva, which I it has immediately gone to one of my top 10 favorite books. It's an incredible book, but it's about an older man who is ready to die, and
Mm,
his I won't give anything away. He's ready to die. So there's suicide warning for this book because it does discuss suicide, but he's ready to die, and he engages very much against his will with this cast of characters that live in his neighborhood. Like in his, you imagine like kind of a cul-de-sac of row homes. So he engages in this like cast of characters that lives in this, and his voice is perfect. It's this like stoic, angry, grumpy, kind of like the prototypical like get off my lawn, which I super relate to.
I was gonna say, no wonder you like this book so
Like,
much.
this is me on the inside. Um, this is perfect. It does feel like you're listening to the old man from Up,
Mm,
the Pixar cartoon. That's who I kind of had in my head the whole time.
yeah.
Um, so him, and then he gets there's an Iranian family that lives across the street that he like starts to engage with. They have several young kids, and like the author just really nails the young kid voices. It's fantastic. And then there's a woman with a dog that he gets in like big feuds with, and there's old friends that live down the street that he's out of contact with, and they all have this. And then there's a fat kid named Jimmy who's hysterical, but they all have these like every character on the street has a very unique and um, I don't want to say charming and like the characters are all charming, but like enchanting voice. Like you
Mm-hmm.
just get into the contrast of this old man talking to all these very enchanting characters, and the contrast between them. So like the Iranian wife across the street is very demanding of him and has the same cynical like get off my lawn type attitude. So like there's a compliment there with the two of them, but then she also won't like tolerate his crap. So there's like a
Mm-hmm.
contrast. So yeah, it's just a really great cast of characters that I was really sad when the book ended. I was like, oh, this is so depressing.
That's like
Uh
the best. That's how you know when the book is best, when you get to the end and it's like, but I want more.
yeah. Yeah, and again, it's not an easy read. It's a smooth read,
Mm-hmm.
but it is emotionally troubling. Like
Yeah.
it's an emotional book. Especially when I got to the end, I actually found myself crying at the end of the book. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Um, but then, yeah, so that was the one I had in mind. Another one is The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, which is a weird allegory book that So
Mhm.
like in beautiful Lewis fashion has like 10 allegories going at one time, and I don't know that any of them were ever fully explained, but they're all, you like feel like this is just deep, like this is smarter than me. But it's about a group of people that get on a bus from Greytown and travel to the mountains, and they
Mm,
run into loved ones that you find out that they're all dead, and they run into loved ones
mhm,
that they had met in, and you have this moment of them having this conversation about what their life was like, and every voice, it's a book that's like 90% dialogue, and every voice is so unique. It's just really, it really like pulls you in. um and I love it is you watch these conversations happen kind of through the narrator's eyes, and you see, a lot of times there'll be these twists in the conversations where you think they're going one direction and then they completely turn and go a different way, and it's just really, the voices really contrast well. um yeah, I guess the other one I was reading recently was JF Penn. Joanna Penn has a Map Walker series, and it's very, I say this with deep admiration, because I know some people might be like, "Oh, that's not a compliment," but it is a compliment. It's very CW superhero show.
mm.
She like totally captures that like fun, campy
I love
cheese.
her.
I do. I like her a lot. But that series is great, and she's got a group of superhero-esque characters that travel around as a pack, and they complement each other really well too. But yeah. So I would recommend that somebody should go check
Yeah.
that out. But yeah, so
Gosh, if we hashtag all these writers, we're
oh
gonna get
man,
so many listeners.
and we'd never know about it because I'm not checking the stats. So
Yeah, that's totally cool too. I mean, I feel like that's better for us to not know.
it's better for me. So so let's so we've got these examples in our heads of like great
Casts of
complementing casts of
characters.
characters. So how do we go about writing those? What are the tips to creating contrasting and complementing voices?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say that you had to really challenge me on the second one, right? Because my experience, other than as an editor, is mostly writing one voice, just different versions of the same one voice.
Yeah, but you write suites of simulations and they all change across. You know how to do this.
Yeah,
This is in there.
yeah. I mean, I know how I
Yeah.
know how to do everything.
Well, yeah, that's why I bring you on the podcast, because you know all of it. So
I know everything. No, just because I think I know everything doesn't mean I actually know everything.
yeah.
Um, but no, I'm really excited about this because this really challenged me. Because when I read a book or like when I'm editing a book, I know when something doesn't work. I think it's a lot easier to figure out what's not working than it
Mhm.
is to figure out what is working and how to replicate it.
Yeah.
So, from the standpoint of like what you need to do for a good cast of characters, I think the first thing is just basic for character development is you have to know who your character is. You have to know what their voice is.
Yeah.
I
And
think that's
I would add to that and say you have to know what their feels are.
I don't know that
Because
phrase.
well, that's because I just made it up.
Okay.
Uh, you have to. So there's a deep, like, writing great character voices demands a large amount of empathy,
Mm-hmm.
which is something we talk about all the time at
Sure.
work. That like you have to be able to empathize with the character. So writing contrasting voices means you have to be able to empathize, like understand the not just the motivations, but how the characters are feeling in each
Mm-hmm.
moment,
Yeah.
so that while you're writing this scene where these two characters are talking to each other, you can feel what each character's feeling
Mm-hmm.
behind their voice. So yeah, I think like you're saying, going and just expanding on like you have to have great character voices. You have to. It starts with like the individual understanding of empathy as well. Like you have to
Mm-hmm.
be able to empathize with both characters or the crowd
Yeah.
at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're understanding them, you also have to have this like understanding not just their feelings but their purpose in
Mhm.
the scene. um, putting characters in a scene just to have characters in a scene never works. Everyone needs to have a reason to be there, and they need to be adding to the dynamics of the room. And if you think about that, like in real life, when you're looking at major events, everyone who's there is there for a reason. There are very rarely situations where you have people who are just observing, because even those observers have a perspective. They have thoughts and they have feelings, and there needs to be an understanding of that. And I'm trying to think of an example, but there are great scenes where somebody's just observing the situation. And there's no, like, they're not saying anything, they're just watching. If you think back to the scene at the jail in the middle of the night in To Kill a Mockingbird, where the crowd gathers and Atticus is reading outside, and Jem and Scout and Dill like come upon the scene, and they walk up, and um, Scout doesn't really know what's going on at first, and she's just kind of observing, and Harper Lee is telling the story from Scout's perspective, and then all of a sudden Scout starts talking, and here's this 8-year-old girl who shouldn't be out in the middle of the night and surely shouldn't be talking to this group of men, and ends up diffusing the whole crowd. And just by like not having an understanding, and everybody else in the scene is silent, and for like 3 pages it's just Scout having a one-sided conversation with this man, and like understanding what all those other characters are doing in that moment is the reason that the scene works, because they were all consistent with who they are, and the moment just needed Scout to say the things that she had to say about Mr. Cunningham's like legal cases, right? Like,
Yeah. And that's the trick, I think, because a lot of times as writers, we fall in love with our protagonist, right? Like we spend so much time relating to the protagonist, understanding the protagonist, like putting ourselves into the protagonist, like getting behind that voice, that we forget that there's other perspectives in the scene as well. And we have to get out of that protagonist perspective, like take off our protagonist glasses and put on the
mm-hmm.
glasses of everybody else in the scene to understand what's actually happening.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's the foundation of getting this great cast of characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, what else? Any other tips you can think of?
Yeah. So the other thing that's really important when it comes to building the cast, so everything that we've talked about now has been like, you've created this cast, you've put them in moments, you're figuring out what they're doing in the moment. But I think you have to even go back further and figure out who your cast is going to be. So you create this protagonist, and you give them flaws, and you give them whatever the opposite of flaws is, favorites.
Strengths.
I'm sorry, what is it?
Strengths.
Strengths. Yes, that's a good word.
I'm here for you.
Okay. We're done dialoguing about dialogue because I can't find the word strength. We're done. That's it. Yeah. So anyway, you give them these strengths and you give them these flaws, and you figure out who they are. Are they funny? Are they witty? Are they wry? Are they grumpy? Like, who are they? And then you have to build a cast of characters around them. And the trick is they have to complement them. You can't have 5 characters who are all the grumpy old man. I mean, there is a movie about grumpy old men. And like the whole thing is about 2 grumpy men like making each other miserable, but they're grumpy differently.
Yeah.
You have to find the unique qualities in your characters, and Lemony Snicket did an amazing job with that. Like each one of the kids, even the baby who couldn't talk yet, like had a voice, and it was very specific, and the narrator had a very specific voice, and Count Olaf, like they all brought something to the table. And even the characters that only showed up in 1 or 2 books, they had a very strategic voice that brought out something great, one of the strengths in each of the main characters. And then each of the main characters was able to shine a light on the antagonist's flaws. So like anytime the three kids were in a scene with Count Olaf, their good just shines so much light on his bad.
Yeah.
And that is what makes awesome dynamics within a cast of characters, is you're allowing the individual strengths to highlight the differences. It can just be really amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I really like it. When I'm thinking about characters, to especially when it comes to like the protagonist antagonist relationship, to make sure that they have similarities and opposites.
Yes.
So like you want them connected and then you want them different. So like I'm thinking as a kid, I remember reading the Alex Cross novels, Robert Patterson's Alex Cross novels, and in Roses Are Red, he has this character named the Mastermind show up, which is like Alex Cross's nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
And they're similar in that they're both sorry, I'm trying to think about how to describe the Mastermind without giving anything away for who he is. They're similar that
If
they're
you read them when you were a kid, statute of limitations is
spoilers are
long
okay.
on spoilers.
Spoilers are okay. Yeah, and I have a love-hate relationship with Robert Patterson because I loved reading his books. They're fast reads, they're fun, the
Mm-hmm.
characters are great, and then I hated reading his books because sometimes I felt like the mystery wrapped up a little too quick.
Mm.
And that was just that was like the love-hate thing was like I love reading this, and I'm angry that you wrapped it up in the way you did. So so it's one of those like I love chocolate. Why do you make me eat so much of it? So yeah, but anyway, the Mastermind and Alex Cross both have this like this like puzzling brain where they're both figuring
Mm-hmm.
things out. So that worked really well. Like that, they complemented each other well there because um, they're both puzzling at all the time. But then the Mastermind was tended to like have these kind of emotional outbursts and explosions, whereas Alex Cross was always very like controlled and disciplined and kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the prototype great detective. So
Sure.
I really like that kind of contrast and comparison between, it's the Batman and the Joker, right?
Sure.
Like
Sherlock Holmes and
Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty.
right.
Yeah, right. Like
Yeah.
it's that contrasting of they complement each other in some ways so that they're equal matches, but then they
Mm-hmm.
have opposite voices in other ways
Yep.
that you can feel. Or uh, King did it recently in Stephen King did it recently in Mr. Mercedes,
Mm-hmm.
where I don't remember the name of the detective, but his detective is kind of this old retired cop who's a little grisly and a little worn down by life, and his antagonist is also worn down by life and also has the same kind of despise of the world, but is also insane because it's Stephen King. So the guy,
Sure. So there's got to be an
yeah,
insane.
there's got to be like eating babies at some point.
Right.
There's no eating babies, but there's some gross stuff in that book though. But so anyway, that's a digression. But it's that when you have that protagonist antagonist relationship, the like planning similarities and contrasts in their voices at the same time makes for really great back and forths between the characters, which is nice.
And you have to do the same thing with your like buddy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, or your romantic relationships. There has to be a core foundation or it doesn't work. In
Yeah.
Karen Slaughter's books, Will and Sarah work so well together because they both have the same level of intensity and appreciation for uh, justice. And it works and they connect on that level. And then they have all kinds of differences that they use. Karen Slaughter uses the differences between them to highlight what's like uncomfortable in their
Yeah.
relationship, but then uses their similarities to always loop them back to each other. And it just makes really good reading because you get into this, and really like any good book is going to do that. You're going to have a cast of characters that are really strong and that really support each other and like show why they're connected to one another. You know, if you want to go back to Stephen King, now I don't read much of Stephen King in his newer stuff, but I read a ton of his older stuff, and I think about it. We talked about it a lot last time, but like what pulls the kids together, or in The Body, which they of course turned into The Stand,
Mm-hmm.
the four boys traveling. There's a reason that those four boys are together, and each one of them has an individual voice, and they're all like contributing to the whole of the group. And that's always a really interesting thing to read too. Um, when you've got a group and the dynamics in the group, and you have to like talk about each one individually.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the name of the writer, but the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants I used to work in the young adult children's section of Barnes and Noble, so a lot of my references unfortunately are young adult
Whatever.
and
It's
younger.
great. Read
But
what you love, people. Read what you love.
well, and now I love it because our job requires so much thinking, and now grad school with the like journal articles that I have to read, I don't want to read anything that requires me to think about anything. I just want like bubblegum reading.
It's
So
awesome.
a lot of young adult. But like the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, each one of those characters was their own person, but
Yeah,
together they created this really good unit, and that unit almost becomes a new character within the storyline. And
that's
that's
cool.
really kind of a cool thing to watch too.
Yeah, that's a masterful move. That's very cool. What else? Any other thoughts?
Um, I don't think so. Let's see. We talked about each character being strong and independent on their own, understanding everybody's voice and being able to empathize with who they are and see from their perspective. We talked about complementing characters, and yeah, we talked about groups,
So I
right?
can give some practical tips, which will help you
Yeah.
keep voices straight. Because it's tough. Like when you're building a huge cast of characters
Mm-hmm.
for a novel, keeping your voices straight is really difficult. One of the things I've seen authors do that I've started doing that I like is finding a picture that represents each voice and putting that picture on the wall above where you write. So especially if you're writing in like the same place every day,
Mm-hmm.
being able to come back to that place and look at your cast of characters will get you into their voices
That's cool.
faster, which is nice. Another thing I like to do is we'll talk about this on another podcast another day, but creating like a mood spectrum for your characters, like a
Mm-hmm.
here's how they act when they're this way, here's how they act when they're this, when they're in these circumstances, here's how they act when they're in these circumstances, and then like putting that little 2-column chart um, for one character next to the 2-column chart for another character.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing I'll do is just put their emotional reactions and how it changes their voice in the book next to each other, so that I can see like, okay, so in this moment of stress, this character is getting anxious and is going to talk a lot, and this character is going to slow down, or this character has a
Mm-hmm.
tick when they get anxious and this character gets angry, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so like going back to The Man Called Uva, there's a great scene where there's anxiety building, and both Uva and the Iranian mother become increasingly angry because they both
Mm-hmm.
respond to that stimulus with anger. So you get to see them like ramp each other up, and they're like becoming
Mm-hmm.
increasingly frustrated with each other. But there's another scene in the book where he's hanging out with this kid Jimmy that he really dislikes, and they, Jimmy is very easygoing and very like wanting to be accepted,
Mm-hmm.
and his voice is very simple and lots of questions and is always very optimistic, right? Like so,
Mm-hmm.
he's this great contrast to Uva. And there's a scene in the book where they have to solve a problem together. I'm not giving anything away, so people can read it and they won't know it's coming until they read it and they're like, oh, that's what Jeff was talking about. So there's this scene where they have to solve a problem together, and as the problem gets more stressful, Jimmy gets more calm and determined, whereas Uva becomes less verbal and more just like
Mm-hmm.
grunting, frustrated. And it's a great like contrast moment, but lining up that idea of like, so here's how here's how this character is going to behave, and here's how this character is going to behave,
Mhm.
so that I know when I write like the intimate scene of my romance, I know this is how this voice changes in intimacy, how voice
Mhm.
A changes in intimacy, and how voice B changes in intimacy. If you have that before you go into writing the scene, it'll help you stay in voice, because that's the big fear, is that
Mhm.
you write this scene that you love, that's a conversation between four characters, and then you go back and read it in the context of the rest of the book. You're like, oh, I love that scene, but none of those characters sound like they're supposed to sound. They all
Yep.
sound very different than they're supposed to be. So like charting that in some way, creating a physical manifestation of it
Mhm.
so that you can look at it before you start writing a scene,
Mhm.
can help you maintain the integrity of your characters' voices. But yeah.
That's a really great couple of tips there. And then I would say, like, from an editing perspective, if you're editing somebody's work, whether it be your own or somebody else's, um, I find that the trick that I like to use the best is to read without the characters' names when
Ooh,
you're reading dialogue.
yeah,
If you read without dialogue, you should be able to know who is saying what without
yeah,
their names
yeah.
if the dialogue is written well,
If
because
it's
you
written well
know
enough,
who the
yeah.
character is. So I would say for those people who are editing their stuff that they've written before and haven't had time to write their charts yet, like going back and reading from that perspective, can you see a difference between your character? Because lots of times, as writers, we have a tendency to get so caught up in our story that we just want to get it out,
Hmm.
and we lose kind of that the different perspectives that we've talked about. We lose this idea that this person is supposed to be getting more anxious while this person is supposed to be getting more silent, and we write kind of like what happens in our own heads for both characters, and then it feels like we have the same character talking to each other.
Hmm.
And then that's when, and you know, that's in other podcasts we can talk about like what you do when you find a problem. I love your solution because it prevents the problems from happening.
Yeah. Fixing them is so much harder. It
But
takes so much longer to fix a manuscript than it does to do it right the first time. Yeah.
yeah, so but seeing as that most of my experience in like the writing outside of educational purposes is coming from an editing perspective, like thinking about it after it's already written, is a totally different thing than thinking about it before you go in to write.
Yeah.
So
I think if somebody wants to, so if you had given me this conversation 6 years ago when I first started writing, I would have panicked. I would have been like, I have no idea what you're talking. What in the world are you talking about? I have no idea how to do that. So if somebody's feeling that way right now, here's a fun exercise you can do to start to push this muscle, this dialogue writing muscle in your body. It's something I did that was super helpful. So you need to write a short story. It needs to be no other. This is exercise, so it's like going to the gym and lifting weights. This is not going to become some great novel, right? Like this is literally just to flex your muscles. So you need to write a short story, conversation between two characters. I remember the first one I did was a husband and wife, and think about a moment that those two characters are going to have
mhm,
that is going to be difficult for them. So I remember one of them I wrote, the man was looking for physical intimacy and the woman was looking to finish her day, right? Another one I wrote, they were separating and the man was about to walk out with his bags and the woman was staying in the house. So get the situation in your mind that you're going to write, and then write the conversation between them. No names, only dialogue, no descriptions, just dialogue, no names attached, no he said, she said, none of
mhm,
that, just lines of dialogue, and really focus on making those lines sound different
mhm,
so that you start to get in that practice of like, okay, I'm gonna write two contrasting character voices, and
mhm,
and you're like you were saying, Laura, they're gonna sound completely different on the page, outside of you know their physical mannerisms, because a lot of times we cheat as writers and we use physical mannerisms to contrast characters. Cheating,
Yep.
totally cheating. So I mean, it's great if you can pull it off, but it is totally cheating. So if you can do the dialogue without the physical characteristics, when
Mm-hmm.
you put the physical movements back in, like if you're going to give your character a limp or a tick, or they're always like playing with their ear or something like that, it'll just enhance that dialogue altogether because you've already got the contrasting voices. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. If this feels overwhelming, that would be start there. Just a short story, it can be 500 words, and just focus on writing two people having a conversation. One time I did two. I wanted to do a sci-fi one, so I did two kids talking about whether or not the people they see in front of them are robots or humans.
I remember that story.
Yeah, this is a fun one.
Yeah.
Um,
I would go even further and and tell people to start with people they already know.
yeah, that
Um,
helps.
because if you're starting with somebody you already know, and good writers are good writers because they're creating realism. They're mimics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They're creating systems. They're creating books, scenarios, scenes, whatever word that you want to use to fill in that blank,
yeah,
where you can look at these people and you can be like, yeah, somebody would do that, somebody would say that. If you're having a hard time, if you're writing some of these exercises and you're not getting to the place where the charts are helping you, or the stories that you're suggesting they practice with people they don't know that they're creating in their head, start with people you know.
yeah.
um,
And it doesn't have, you don't have to know them personally. It can be an actor that you love and obsess over. It can be, I remember some of the first stories I wrote, I was listening to a lot of Mark Maron's podcast. And so I would use his voice as a template a lot because
mm-hmm.
he has a very unique um, voice that is easy to pick out. Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
key, is you want to find somebody you're mimicking
Yep.
that has unique aspects to their voice, so you can practice writing and getting behind that. To bring it back to the first point we made, getting behind their feels, getting behind their
Yep.
perspective and empathizing with them. So like, yeah, getting in that space where you can
Right.
kind of see the conversation from their perspective.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're big into politics, Donald Trump having a conversation with Sarah Palin
Oh
would
man.
be
Yeah.
pretty
Two
awesome.
very unique voices.
But like,
If
there's,
you write that, send that to Laura. She wants to read it.
yes, I would love to read that.
She wants to read it. Yeah.
um but yeah, I mean, and that's just like, have fun with it. Use these practice opportunities to really like hone your craft.
Yeah.
Take time to enjoy it. Not every word that you write is going to be like the great American novel. And quite honestly, I said this in the beginning, most of the books that I read, I don't remember the words that were said, but I
Mm-hmm.
remember the scene. I
Yeah.
remember how it made me feel. I remember thinking, if I were in that room, this is what I would expect to
Yeah.
see
You
or
remember the
feel.
connection to the story.
So
Yeah.
in that regard, your dialogue and your story in general really don't matter as much as the feeling that you create in
Mm-hmm.
the person who's reading. So that emotional attachment you had to the book that you just read because you connected with the grumpy old
Oh
man,
man. Yeah. Totally cried at the end. It was
or
bad.
the
I was in
stories
my
I read.
kitchen. It
Yeah,
was, the kids walked in. It was weird.
yeah.
It's like,
So
it's a good book. Yeah. So yeah. And yeah. Um, and I will come back on what I said in that it may not turn into a novel. I said that and I'm thinking, every novel all 10 novels I've written started as a short story. So
there you go.
you do find a lot of ideas in
Yep.
those short stories. Yeah.
Yep. Especially when you find character voices in a short
But it's
story that
always what it
are
is.
right. Like,
Yeah. It's
you
always what it
create
is.
that relationship and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I need a whole book or
Yeah. My
a whole
obsession with Mark
series.
Maron became a book called Mark and All the Magical Things. And it's, yeah.
Yep. I remember
Yeah.
that one.
Very weird. Not one of my most marketable books. It's about a guy who
Okay.
talks to inanimate objects all the time, but it's fun. I liked it. I wrote it for me. It's
Well,
fun.
and really, most people who are writing at the beginning of their career are really only writing for them. I mean, you and I are mostly doing this podcast for just
For
us
us, nobody listens to this. I don't know. I'm not checking the
until
stats.
until it's not, right? Until you become a world famous author and then they're all like, why is he talking to this woman who doesn't even write?
Which
She
is,
just edits.
is any second I'm going to become a world famous author. There really is just like a switch that somebody needs to flip. And I've put in the order for it to be flipped, but they haven't flipped it yet. But
Oh my
any
goodness.
minute they're going to flip it for me.
Well, they need to get on it. It's your birthday. Today seems like a
It's my
really good day for
birthday.
that to happen.
Hear that, book people? Flip it today. Okay, we're super digressed, so we're going to wrap.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I have to find the button to stop the recording. There it is.